long holiday weekend. This is episode 1 of a new endeavor, Recovering Privacy. Recovering Privacy is a live weekly discussion about data surveillance, cyber harassment, data deletion, and privacy-enhancing tools. Our goal is to discuss real-world problems and real-world solutions with privacy experts, victims, maybe even some former perpetrators. The format of our show is an audio-only town hall event, and after a prelude, we'll bring members of the audience up to discuss issues with us. So bring your questions, comments, real-life issues and solutions. We want to know your perspective. I'm Jeff Jockisch, a vocal data privacy researcher and a partner at Avantis Privacy. I live at the intersection of privacy and data about privacy. I'm here with Colby Scullion. He's the CEO of Avantis, a leader in location privacy research, and the driver of our automation of data broker opt-outs. Today, we're going to talk first about cyber harassment, and we're going to go on from there. Cyber harassment is a really bad issue that really has only gotten worse over time. There's a few statistics I'd like to share with you, quite a few actually. Most of them are from the Pew Research Center, and they observed a few things. First of all, at least half of the U.S. population, the young part of the U.S. population, has faced bullying online in 2022. 28% of children around the world have experienced cyberbullying that is racially motivated. That's actually just horrendous. But it isn't just about children. 41% of all Americans have personally experienced some form of online harassment. 60% of women under the age of 35 who've used online dating say that someone continued to contact them after they said that they were not interested, sometimes giving them unwanted sexually explicit messages or images. That's really just not acceptable, right? But it's not just harassment, right? I mean, it's harassment in different forms that really makes it problematic. Since 2014, all of these stats that I'm going to read off to you have been up year over year. Offensive name calling, purposeful embarrassment, stalking, physical threats, harassment over a sustained period, and explicit sexual harassment. That's really just crazy that over the past 10 years, each one of these things has increased year over year, right? I guess maybe it's not all that crazy if you think about it, right? That we're moving our lives from the physical world to the digital world, and our problems there have just essentially migrated online. But I think that the fact that that we're sort of separated, that our actions when we're not face to face can seem a little bit more impersonal, allows this kind of harassment to get worse and worse in cyberspace. So we've got this problem. And now what we want to do is actually talk about a specific instance that we can get into for discussion. So I didn't know about this issue, but there's a guy, a cop in Louisville, his name is Bryan Wilson, and Bryan's in jail now. And he's in jail because he was extorting women with their own nude images. And I'm here with Colby Scullion, CEO of Avantis. He's a leader in location privacy research and the driver of our automation for data broker opt-outs. And Colby, do you want to talk a little bit about this Bryan Wilson case? He was this Louisville, Kentucky police officer. Tell us about that situation.
Yeah, I do. And Jeff, thank you. I appreciate the introduction, and everybody, thank you all for joining. It's much appreciated. Yeah, so the case of Bryan Wilson is particularly interesting. So Bryan Wilson, again, former police officer in Louisville, Kentucky, as Jeff had mentioned, had been sexually extorting and harassing, cyber stalking certain women. essentially how he decided to do this was the Louisville Metro Police Department has access to a system called Accurate. Accurate is a product of LexisNexis, and it has an incredible amount of data on folks. Now, from their website, they state they source their data from over 10,000 different data sources, and they provide this to law enforcement, government agencies, and other corporations as well. So essentially, what Bryan Wilson did was he was able to obtain highly personal information about these particular women from Accurate, and he effectively used some of that data to identify their Snapchat accounts. He then approached a hacker who was able to hack their Snapchat accounts, and he was then able to access photos of them. And after this, he decided to start sexually extorting some of them. So, and this is just to kind of give you a little bit of a background on some of the horrible things that this officer did. So he had sent text messages to numerous women, and none of them, Jeff, I don't believe any of them knew who he was, if I remember right.
Yeah, they didn't know he was a cop. They just thought he was some guy, right?
Yeah. So to set the scene, these women received a text message from a random number. One of these message exchanges, here is one of the quotes he had told one of these women. He says, "I plan to send your pictures to your parents, brother, grandparents, sisters, friends, Facebook, Pornhub, employer, etc. But I will gladly keep all of this between you and I and tell you who sent them to me if you promise to leave me out of the drama and show me a few more pics. That way we can both benefit."
So yeah, he was essentially, he would find, dirty pictures that they posted to their own account and then use those to extort more pictures out of them. And this guy was just a real creep. And when they finally figured out who he was, some of the women tried to get the police department to do something about it, but it eventually took the Department of Justice to step in to finally get the guy thrown in jail. But a really pretty bad situation. So I think this is, just a really interesting situation about how, personal data can be exploited. This one is about a cop, right? But anybody can get access to your data. And let's pull a few people on stage here and talk about this kind of issue. Does anybody want to come on stage and chat about this with us? If you want to raise your hand, I can pull you on stage. You don't have to have any particular stories or any particular opinion. Let's just bring you on stage and we can have a little bit of a discussion. Here you go. Hi, Donna. How you doing? Phil? Pulling you up too. Excellent. Hey, guys. Donna, you have something to contribute to the discussion here?
It looks like you're on mute the moment, Donna.
Oh, yeah, you guys. So once I pull you on, you still have to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So my story is regarding my husband, and he'll be thrilled that I'm sharing this. But whatever, he did it. He was obviously looking at pornographic material, and because of that, his phone then got hacked, and he was receiving texts of me, my mom, our son, and they were trying to extort him for money. So it's just a story of how looking at the wrong websites can get you in a lot of trouble and stress you out for a while. Thankfully, we were able to resolve it, but I just wanted to share that strange story.
That's interesting, Donna. So are you saying that somebody was texting you guys about him?
No, mainly he was getting the text, but he ended up showing me, and I said, you did something wrong. There's no reason for you to be receiving this type of information, this type of response from someone. But it was frightening because I don't remember, it was a couple of years ago, but it was, I think our child was a baby at the time. He's 9 now. So it was frightening to see so many different different shots and then threats against him, my
Gotcha.
mom, and myself to my husband's phone.
Gotcha. So he
Only.
essentially didn't allow them to extort him, but
Yes.
gotcha.
But, lessons learned.
Exactly, right?
Right.
But it's hard. Some people can't quite get there, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jeff, it looks like we have looks like Violet's also asking to speak as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to click here. This UX is acting a little weird. I was trying to get Doug on here too. I clicked him a couple of times and it wasn't quite working. There we go, though. Got Violet up here.
All right. Well, this is too cool, Jeff. I haven't done this type of LinkedIn Live voice before, so bravo for this. But I want to throw out another idea to what Donna said, because I had I saw a phishing email that was similarly crafted, and wondering how good the phishing are at pulling at our pain points and making us feel hacked. Because I'm a Baylor law professor in privacy and cybersecurity, and my Baylor email came on, and there was the sextortion emails, which I don't know if anyone knows Baylor, but they're a super Christian university.
Yeah.
Super, very straight-laced. And so it was really surprising to see. And it was not an email that I ever used for anything commercial. And in terms of it being like Donna, to your point, there wasn't a situation where I could have come into pornography on that email, or that would have been associated. But beside the point is the way the email was crafted. I just kept reading it because I was like, it is so it felt personal, even though I hadn't done anything, and even though I knew there was nothing connected to this. And I wonder how much is also, and not your example, Donna, but I bet there's somewhere in the middle examples too of people that get emails, and they might come on and accuse you, because this email was accusing me of, it said, you have visited pornographic sites, and we have video of you from the webcam, and I'm sitting there going, none of this is available, there's no connection here.
Mm-hmm.
But it almost had convinced me that I'd done something wrong, when I know that there was nothing there to have done wrong, right? And so I think there's another feeling of sextortion emails where they have mastered guilt, and almost and I don't know how they do it this well, but the writing of these emails, as I've dissected them and used them in my classes, really has shown people get squirmish about this topic anyway. And I think there's another level of, some of it may be an extortion attempt without actual valid hacking, without actual technical control, without actual loss of privacy. It could be that they got your information from Facebook of who your husband was or wife was, and then they said, we have this information and we're going to give it to your son and your husband if you don't pay for it to me. They can find that publicly. So I just kind of want to throw a little bit of doubt in that mix, that it may be more of a bluff than for some of the cases.
That's really interesting.
That's a very interesting thing, and actually, to be honest with you, I can relate. So the email that you just described is actually very similar to ones that I have been receiving. So I'm part of a local social club, and it appears that, from what I can tell, I've received emails from seemingly hacked email accounts using the members of this club's name, and it's not just one person. It's been maybe up to a dozen at this point. And the content of the email sounds exactly like what you were telling me. And yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like that there's a way that they obtain verified email accounts and try to extort people using some of their contacts. And it's a very
Is it publicly
a
available?
change.
Is the list of people publicly available? Because they could have guessed too, right? Like, is it a social club email?
No, so the list of members is not publicly available.
Okay.
So to me it seems like perhaps their database had either been hacked or there could be a nefarious actor on the inside that I was, very, very surprised by.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Jeff, that actually wasn't something I had talked to you about before. I probably should have, but yeah, now that Violet had brought that up, it really kind of reminded me about it.
Yeah.
I just feel like it has to be some mix, because Colby, it's like there's some psychological thing that they play where I know that threat actors use urgency and greed and curiosity, but this guilt that comes with it really plays on our privacy, like our core privacy understanding and hope.
I've heard, Violet, that they've done this with the webcam guilt before. Not that you've actually visited anything or done anything, but that they've caught you on your webcam.
Well, that's what the email said, right, Colby? I mean, mine said that. Mine said all this stuff about whatever, pleasuring yourself on webcam or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, I get that, and then I also get that there have been that we have a number of photos of you that are indecent or something like that. I've received a couple of different.
And you think, Colby, like, how on earth would they have anything? I mean, I was going back in my mind going, there's no way that exists in my brain, but it still made me think, and that to me is good fishing, I guess.
Yeah, I was completely puzzled. I was like, yeah, I'm fairly certain none of this exists, but this is very detailed. It's interesting you're right. It's interesting from a psychological level.
I didn't mean to invalidate what Donna was saying too. It just made me think about the spectrum of what could be happening.
Yeah. Phil, did you have something to add, or anybody else from the audience about cyber harassment?
One thing, just given my family relationship involvement in this area, but special needs individuals, children, young adults, are particularly susceptible to this type of activity. Obviously, you access to such devices and social media, things like that. You do your best to monitor it, and I'm also talking about in a school setting. But when you have individuals who are their mental capacity is inhibited, they are really, really subject to being taken advantage of in this area. And I guess the only reason why I brought that up is just to caution folks, and maybe just to waive that, because I rarely hear special needs individuals ever addressed in data privacy.
Yeah.
And I do think that it's incumbent, because you can get, any young person, you become friends with them very easily, because God bless them, they're so bloody trusting and just so bloody decent.
Yeah, that's.
And then all of a sudden you're a buddy, and all of a sudden, hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And anyway, I was just throwing that out there as something to ponder and just keep in mind, and maybe every once in a while, when bigger brains like y'all's are addressing this topic of just please, maybe throw in these special souls. That was it.
That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, Phil. And I think that those kinds of attacks that Violet's mentioning probably work extremely well on children, right? Because they're more, maybe not more gullible, but less sophisticated, right?
And there's more shame to it at that age, right? The younger, the more shame associated with that type of activity.
Right. Doug, I'm trying to bring you on stage. Clicking the allow to speak. Did we get you up there? We did not. Not sure what the hell's going on there. Excuse my language. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about solutions. We've got another topic too we can bring up here in a second. But what do we do about these kinds of situations once they've happened? So you've lost your privacy. The topic of this this podcast is recovering privacy, not losing privacy. So Violet or Phil or anybody in the audience, what do we do once these things have happened? How do you recover your privacy? There are, I think there are some things that you can do, right? I mean, obviously you have to have some recovery in terms of sort of like your mental recovery, right? And you have some things like legal recovery. You can have some recourse, like Bryan, the cop from Bryan Wilson, the cop from Louisville. He's actually in jail, though we don't always get that kind of legal recovery, right? But how about data recovery? Can we recover when we lose all of our data? I guess
I'm thinking bringing up the recent face, FTC and FTC and Amazon Ring. I don't, everyone I'm sure remembers that very recent situation where they got Ring monitoring inside your house for
right.
how many years, and I don't recall any criminal prosecutions coming from just the one misuse of data.
Right.
And I'm wondering, if I recall correctly, I don't recall where it was mandated that they delete it. Now I'd have to go back and reread that the decree there, but I'm almost positive they didn't really work required. So in that instance, and I have to admit, that's why me personally, that's the one reason why I've never gotten Ring, is I didn't like their privacy policy to begin with, and there's always something I was a little hesitant about. But that's just me. I have family members who have it, so I often wonder. I don't know how you put the genie back in that bottle. I mean, if it's not trying to be deleted, it's still there.
Yep.
But the only other one I would guess the question for you there, Jeff, is would your company, would they be able to delete such, I guess, historical data? I heard you. I listened to the podcast on Shifting Left, which is fantastic, by the way. I highly recommend everyone immediately after this webinar go listen. But
thanks.
Is that something that y'all could tackle, or say on Amazon's terms of service, you're just hosed on that?
Well, it depends. There are ways that you can get some data deleted. That type, we haven't actually tried to delete Ring data, so I'm not positive on that one. But different types of data in different repositories, often it can, though it can take some work and some time. But let me sort of reiterate what I was trying to say before, because I was sort of hemming and hawing, right? So there's really sort of three different pieces of recovery that, from my sort of point of view, right? There's sort of psychological recovery, there's a legal recovery, and there's a data recovery process, right? And we've all sort of got to go through that psychological recovery, and that can take a lot of time. There's potentially a legal recovery process, though that's not often available to everybody. And then there's a data recovery process. And the question is, does that work? Can it work? And do people even know it exists? Right? And that's what Avantis tries to do. and we're actually just starting that now. So we've got some really awesome new processes that we think can help people do that data recovery process. And we think it's going to be sort of revolutionary. And there are people that are in the space, right? The whole data deletion ecosystem that sort of started with, deleting your information from data brokers has been around for a while now, since we started to get data deletion rights from privacy laws, so like GDPR and, even laws before that. You have data deletion rights from HIPAA. You can delete some of your data there. You have data deletion rights from COPA. You have data deletion rights from FERPA. But really the more modern data deletion rights come from CCPA and GDPR and things like that, right? But a lot of consumers don't even know those exist, and very few of them are actually implementing it. And it's because it's hard, because there are so many companies that have your data. To actually go to each one of them individually and try to delete your data it's virtually impossible, right? And so some companies have sprung up to try to help consumers do that, but most of them, like Avantis even, right, are for profit because it's expensive to do that, right? So the question is it worth it, and can we do it, and how effective is it? So I'll stop there for a moment. Do you want to add anything to that, Colby, or do people have questions about that?
Yeah, certainly. I think that, I mean, of course, no data deletion service will be perfect and be able to get every piece of data from you, of you offline. But I think that, I think that understanding, one thing that I've learned coming into the privacy industry is really understanding how data brokers operate and some of their data flows really does seem to help piece some things together. Unfortunately, it's very long and manual type of work to do, but I think that data deletion services could provide value to some folks out there, and also the unfortunate part is, and Jeff, you had mentioned this a little bit earlier, is the legal recovery process. I feel it's actually a shame that there aren't more legal resources available to people who are not able to afford some of these services, who perhaps may have been doxxed or had some photos published of them on the internet. It's not something that these folks had asked for, and it would be nice to see some sort of legal solution or program spun up to help folks who are in need like this. Because from my personal life, I know people who have been impacted by this, and it, from a psychological perspective, is extremely damaging.
Right. So I can add a little more context here, guys. So
It looks like Heidi's also trying to join it.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm not paying attention here. Heidi, let's get you allowed. Did that work? There you go. Awesome. I don't know why we are not able to bring Doug on.
Hey guys.
Hey, Heidi, how are you?
Heidi?
Hey, how are you? I'm here for Violet. How you doing? I hope she's still there.
Yeah.
Right?
It looks like she's on mute. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
girl. Listen,
I was on mute.
Right? I don't want to get too in your business, but I want to talk about the psychological recovery. Can you speak to that? Is it something you ever get over, or is it a new awareness you just don't forget?
Oh, I don't even know. I feel like it's still working. Heidi, I remember back, I did the notification back when we did Sony and Anthem and Home Depot and all that. And I kept thinking, like, the one thing no one invented yet, and still hasn't invented really, is some kind of recovery for psychological issues or reputational damage. Like, we saw this with the Ashley Madison breach, right? Like, I remember our company turned down the Ashley Madison response because we were like, how can we ever do a good job? No one's going to like getting a letter that you lost this information on a really, vulnerable website. So I don't think I have an answer to that, but I would love to start a business with anyone that does think that they can help with the recovery piece. I just think so much of it is bluffing. I mean, I have to think. I mean, I don't know, Heidi. Do you think they have and collect a lot of information, a la social dilemma type stuff, and then use it against us? Because I feel like the personal extortion game seems like that would be super manual. And guess what? If I could automate a really good email and send it out to 1,000 people and just change the names via mail merge, I would have that would be a much more lucrative hacker situation to me if I could bluff it.
Yeah, totally. I agree with you. I think the psychological safety is a myth at this point, and I think it's partly because we don't have rights in our data. So yeah, you can go through all this work and expense to get data deleted, but 10 minutes later, what if they reload your data? You're not going to know. It's not a permanent delete. You know, I see Tom's on the call too. He's trying to do something about that with the Delete Act in California and getting it reintroduced in the House of the Circus in Congress. So we have things that we can look forward to, but for right now, we're not going to be able to address that psychological safety issue. Another reason is because trying to assert your rights under the available laws that we have will damage you further. The act of seeking redress will damage you further. So you're fighting for privacy, but you have to do it in a very public way. So, aside from the expense of getting access to even fight for your rights, I mean, you've got to be willing to light yourself on fire in the public square so everybody can see why you're mad. So, I mean, none of this is set up in a way to actually give people redress. So the problem is just going to get worse, right?
Well, and I love, Heidi, because you always kind of talk about the legitimate's not a good word for it, but the way that people use, ad tech, data broker to create profiles and take information from us. So there's like two sides to look at this privacy issue too, is how did the bad guys use it and how did the good guys that also have, privacy taking tendencies that are not so good, also use it. So like on your side, everything you're saying is right, but on the hacker side, we see this all the time where they'll say, oh, just believe us, it's deleted, and here's your encryption. So I think that it's interesting on that side too to say even the criminals that get paid for extortion and data, like basically hush money, and we're seeing that a lot with the double and triple extortion, is like it's no longer just paying. Like I have a backup, I can get totally back up, but what are you gonna do when I'm Clop or Lockbit and I'm saying, Shell, the example that came today, we have 7 different countries that we have your sensitive employee data from, and we're just gonna go tell them you have it. Like we're not gonna do anything other than pull it out publicly, and when they pay them, it's like a hope and a prayer. So Heidi, it feels like both on the legal side and the illegal side, there's not. It's a farce. So
there used to be more honor amongst thieves. Oh, what happens, right? I think they're taking a page out of the Silicon Valley handbook and say, do what you want, and the price of forgiveness is much less than the revenues you make doing this business. So just do what you want.
Yeah.
100%.
Hey, I want to make sure everybody got at least one of the points that Violet just made there. If thieves are stealing your data and locking it up and using ransomware, chances are they exfiltrated that data first, right, before they locked it up. And when you pay that ransom, don't believe them if they told you that they deleted all your data. Chances are in a year or two that data is going to show up someplace and they're going to either re-ransom it, right, or they're just going to release it. So you might have paid the ransom and got away, from the problems for a minute, but your problem didn't go away.
Can I caveat it, Jeff?
Yeah.
Because I think what you're saying is 100% right to personal. You don't want to have anyone scare you into paying an extortion attempt, and you want to go to people that can help. But when it comes to companies and data, I've seen way too many examples where this it unfairly kind of discriminates against small businesses, because of course if Coca-Cola gets hacked, or Shell, I don't mean to throw Coca-Cola, but Shell recently getting hacked, of course they're going to have the resources to bounce back, both in backup, both whether or not they paid the ransom. But I've had so many calls over the last 10 years where it was a small husband and wife doctor office and they didn't have any way to get the files back. So sometimes it closes doors of small companies because they don't have the resources that big companies have. So sometimes that decision to pay the ransom is more of a business decision than well, yeah, of course we don't want to pay the ransom, but we do say on the side, no one would condone paying a ransom on the incident response side. But sometimes the morality piece is not as much a part of it as much as the privacy side of me wants it to be. It is sometimes the narrative has to be that you did everything you could to get back to helping your clients.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, right? I'm not saying you shouldn't pay the ransom. I'm just saying that it doesn't solve your problem.
Correct.
It doesn't solve your long-term problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a quick question, and perhaps this is a bit naive, but in cases, Violet, Heidi, that you've seen when it comes to ransom payments for files, is there like any, does law enforcement end up finding these guys sometimes? I would suspect not, but I don't know.
There's been some good wins lately. I don't know, Heidi, if you want to comment, but there's been some good wins. With Hive, FBI caught Hive. There was a recent indictment a week or two ago. We're seeing a lot more movement with the Russia-Ukraine war because it's actually forcing people to travel more across different lines, and so they're putting themselves more in an opportunity to be caught with the different IP addresses and all that stuff. So we're seeing movement, but I think what is so encouraging is we are seeing arrests. Discouraging is, I've sat through a 2-hour presentation from U.S. law enforcement on how they caught this very intricate 7-year scheme that posed as like eBay. Like they actually had a super technical way to distort the URL. It was very technical. It was 3 people in this kind of group, and they caught those 3 people, but it took 7 years. And the biggest thing I took away from that talk for 2 hours was going, oh my gosh, it took you guys 7 years to catch 3 of these guys, and how much harm they did along the way. And that kind of blew my mind a little bit.
Yeah, and it took them 2 hours to tell you that, too.
Right? I know. They went through all the details. I'm going, well, why can't you go find some more people?
Yeah, well, that's the kind of where we're at right now. We just got the people. Like, I remember when the IRS started working with chainalysis. And so they started getting blockchain technology so that they could trace some of these funds so that they could bust more people, because they still have to follow the rules of due process and, access between different governments and all of these other rules and regulations that the bad guys don't have to follow. They only have to be right once and get away with the money, but it's a lot more work to chase them down. And generative AI has been a boon for them because now, they have things like generative AI-assisted polymorphic malware, where it keeps going out and getting new code to continually subvert itself in the system. How are you supposed to get a hold of that, right? Like, that's a dangerous collection of words right there.
It's not only changing, like you said, but it's also changing to specifically evade the detection of whatever bells and whistles you have on to show malware.
That's right.
Yeah.
Anybody have any comments on that?
Just that it's scary.
Oh, Violet, we ruined the party again.
I gotta stop. I gotta go on mute.
Yeah. Well, I did want to talk about a little bit of a variation on cyber harassment. So let's talk for a minute about doxing. It's a little bit of a different way for your information to sort of be used against you. So I think people know about doxing, right? Doxing is sort of when somebody publishes your information and makes it public, like your contact information, right? And a lot of people don't know, whether doxing is legal or illegal. Is it illegal? It essentially means to share your personal information online, right? Your address, your phone number. It's not always against the law because there's usually no specific rules about it. However, whether it's legal depends upon the situation. If someone does it in a mean or harmful way, they can get in trouble for it. For generally for other crimes like stalking or bullying or pretending to be someone else or encouraging violence. Recently, some states have started making new laws to try to stop doxing. For example, the state of Kentucky and Hong Kong have laws to punish people who dox others. Right. But and Twitter now says it's against their terms of service to share someone's private information. So technically you could go to jail for doxing someone else, but not really for the doxing itself. It's really sort of contributing to other criminal offenses. And probably Heidi, could weigh in on this a little bit better. But we hear about doxing all the time, right? Elon Musk claimed that he was doxxed. That's why he put the Twitter policy together. Billie Eilish was doxxed recently. There's in the news a conservative group recently claims that they were doxxed. It looks like they were. A J-pop group was recently doxxed. But what about regular people? There's a really interesting story that just popped up. It was on TikTok about a couple of mean girls who were making fun of somebody, and this woman was at a baseball game, and a couple girls behind her were making fun of her, and so she posted a video about it, and then all these fans of hers doxed these two mean girls, right? And so the question I guess I want to pose to the audience is that okay? And what do we do about that? So you're just an average person. Maybe you did something stupid, and now your information's all over the internet, and people are coming at you. What do we do about those situations? Any thoughts?
Jeff, I definitely think it's a tricky scenario when something like that happens, right? Because, and stories like this kind of seem to captivate people in a sense, right? Because, in one sense, yes, the girls in this scenario seem to be harassing this person, making fun of her for no particular reason, other than, it appears she was like filming or something like that during this incident. But at the same time, it's I'm not sure that the mean girls, quote mean girls, should have had their information thrown online. But what can be done about it? It's difficult to say, at least from my perspective.
Yeah. Well, I guess
also on university campuses, if you check terms of use, they have a lot of them because there are certain student groups. You remember certain student groups, there have been documented cases of doxing, and it's supposed to be against terms of use, but obviously once the information is out there, it doesn't go away.
Right. I mean, yeah, we always say, stuff that goes on the internet's there forever, right? It's hard to make that stuff disappear. You got
and also just as far as addressing this. I mean, maybe you mentioned that Delete Act, out of California, but Senator Bill Cassidy out of Louisiana has also submitted a Delete Act, and I personally, I've already contacted my representative, and my two senators saying, hey, please co-sponsor this.
Nice.
I know it sounds silly, but if we aren't willing to do that on this call, then we can't really expect anyone to do it. And so I've already retweeted that, out and about, and I would strongly encourage people to do that as well, because that one would delete all the information from data brokers. And even though I know that won't magically fix much of anything, it would be a federal law. It would be something.
Sure.
And I would just really, really encourage people to it's very easy to find your representative. It's very easy to ask them to co-sponsor it. And who doesn't like to get a generic email from their rep saying, hey, thanks for contacting my office?
Absolutely. We should give a little more information there. So the Delete Act is pretty amazing, and kudos to Tom Kemp for helping spearhead that effort. This is a California law that essentially creates sort of a do not call list type proposal for data brokers, which would let consumers have a sort of a one-stop shop to opt out of data brokers that are registered in the state of California. It would sort of be implemented by the FTC, but that's sort of beside the point. But it would really only apply to registered data brokers and only for California. So it does have some limitations, but it would be a wonderful start and really helpful. The ADDPA, the federal proposed law from last year, actually had a lot of those elements. The California law is a little bit better, and there are some other state laws, like the one Phil just mentioned, that would sort of mirror that. So we need to sort of go after that. That would be pretty helpful. It sort of does some of the stuff that Avantis does to help delete consumer data and implement those rights, but maybe not quite so far. So, yeah.
Jeff, one question that I want to pose here is, so when laws like this pass, say like the Delete Act in California, right? Do we think that there is a possibility for certain brokers to just say, and maybe even some of the larger ones to say, we're not going to register. There's a fine involved. We'll pay the fine, but we're not going to register. Our data is a little bit more precious to us than what this fine is.
Well, I think it's probably going to happen in some cases. We'll have to see how the enforcement sort of falls out. A part of the problem with the data broker registries right now is sort of twofold. One is the enforcement, right, which is pretty abysmal, both in terms of what the fine is and I don't think there's been any enforcement at all, actually, of the agencies or enforcement mechanisms like the Attorney General is going after companies that are not registered. But the bigger problem is the definition of who is a data broker. Right now, there's a very, I guess, trimmed down definition. You have to be a third party. You have to actually sell the data. That's partially addressed by some of the improved definitions of, whether it's a sell or a share. But there are some other sort of constraints as well. So a lot of companies that we think of as data brokers, or you would imagine are data brokers, are not legally a data broker. So that's part of the reason that they're like between California and Vermont and soon Texas, there'll probably be less than 1,000 companies registered as data brokers. But I've got 3,000+ companies that I consider data brokers.
Yeah, I think that, and Jeff, it's fantastic the work you're doing with the data broker data set. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I think you're right that I think a lot of brokers are going to say it's fine. I'll just pay the fine. I'm not going to register. And also, I think a lot of them that you allude to, I think a lot of them are just going to say, I am not a data broker. I am an ad tech company, and that is it. So yeah, I think a proper definition of what a data broker still needs to be hashed out. And I know some of these privacy laws coming online, do attempt to do that, but of course I guess it's subjective for many folks.
Yep. A lot of these companies are incestuous, right? They'll be one type of company, but they'll buy a sort of a data broker or a company that's sort of like connected in the space. We know that, for instance, the credit bureaus are buying data brokers so that they don't necessarily have to, grab the data themselves. Ad tech companies are, buying data brokers, and there's a lot of ways for these companies to get the data without actually having to be a data broker themselves directly.
This makes it particularly difficult to actually do opt-outs for some of these companies, because because like you said, whenever a larger company purchases a data broker, sometimes it's not particularly clear where to go to opt out. Some of them don't even have privacy policies on their website, unfortunately. It creates a tough environment for folks who are looking to increase their privacy to find these mechanisms to remove their data.
Right. And how that data moves back and forth between these organizations and what's actually legal and is sort of murky, and some of the stuff they're doing may not be maybe as legal as they'd like it to be, but how are they actually going to get called on any of those business practices? Who knows, right?
Right. It's like, is the parent company receiving data from the child company? Where is that going? There's probably a flow of a number of different companies under the same umbrella. Are they using the same data sets? Who owns what? It's a purposely constructed web of data that is kind of meant to confuse and meant to stay in their hands.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty obvious, at least to us on the outside, that that's the case. Whether when I look at organizations like that, I don't necessarily attribute. I don't always attribute malintent, right? Because I don't think organizations always have, a specific thought process. I mean, sometimes maybe the CEOs do, right? But organizations often justify their actions sort of in retrospect, right? Or they sort of like have these thought processes. Well, they don't always think, right? They just do, right? And then there's the result, right? So I don't always think that they're malicious intentionally, but things sort of end up that way just because there's a profit motive.
I also, from my opinion, I also think the ad tech industry and particularly some of the workers in it, of course, like you said, I don't think they have bad intentions. I think they're looking at it from the angle of, we're here to provide, consumers with the best ads possible and to promote brands. And I think that the industry itself does a pretty good job of, in a sense, numbing some of their employees to the potential harmful impacts that some of their collection practices, have.
Yeah. So let's open this back up. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions about harassment or recovering privacy? We can wrap up here a little bit. One thing I did want to say, if nobody has any questions, is talking a little bit about some of what we're trying to do at Avantis. There are a lot of data deletion services out there, and most of them are sort of trying to automate data opt-outs. There are some sort of high-end services that are primarily thousands or even fives and tens of thousands of dollars that VIPs use. Maybe they've had some sort of harassment or stalkers, things like that, and they might negotiate to get back a video or delete a bunch of data and go after a stalker, things like that the average person is never going to be able to afford. One of the things that Avantis is trying to do is bridge a gap between those two things to try to offer a data deletion service that does more than what the base services do. Delete more than just your information off of a couple hundred data broker sites, and do more than just delete from data broker sites. So we're trying to actually offer a new service called Signature Purge. No, we're not trying. We're going to offer. We haven't. We've just actually sort of released the service, and we're bringing on our first clients. And Signature Purge is that going to delete your data from over 500, probably closer to like 1,000 data brokers, and then also do an open source intelligence scan for data that's outside of the data broker ecosystem in other public locations, dark web locations, and deep web locations, and try to delete that information as well. So it's going to be a more comprehensive service and targeted more toward a middle market, not the higher end market. And we think that this is going to be sort of interesting to a wider audience than currently has this option available.
Yeah, Jeff, I think that was a good. I think that was a good summary there, and you know, it's extremely exciting to, you know, to begin this venture with you. It's been wonderful so far, but yeah, I think that you know, we're constantly putting out more services, like what Jeff had mentioned, on top of location broker deletion, and there will definitely be a lot more to come.
Yeah. All right. Well, with if nobody else has any comments or questions, I think we'll wrap this up for today, and hopefully we'll have some really great discussions next week. If you have any questions or ideas for the episode next week, send me a ping or an email, and we'll try to get that worked into the episode next week. Hope you all had a great episode, and hope you all have a great week. We'll hopefully see you next week. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, this has been Recovering Privacy Episode 1. See us again next week for Episode 2.